the last few classes and integrate them into one slightly longer video lecture. There's just a couple key areas I wanted to focus on. So let's start off with looking at one particular set of ads which I think are very interesting, and then move on into personal selling. So let's look at the slides that matter, so to speak. When you have a chance, I'd like you to take a look at a campaign done by Dove. It's very much in line with branding and image, very alternative in terms of advertising. This is the Evolution commercial. This goes back a few years ago. It's an effort by Dove to talk about beauty and what beauty means, and the fact that it isn't skin deep. You know, you've heard that expression likely, hopefully. This is an ad that was actually won many awards. It was done a few years back. Take a look at it. Here's the link for it. Here's one that was done and started just recently about and kind of an evolution, so to speak, from the last set of Dove ads on branding and image that talks about beauty and what it means. And these ads really don't talk about the kinds of products that Dove offers, but they talk about sort of the issues around what image and beauty mean to society. And it's a really interesting alternative way to look at what you find with a different alternative kind of marketing. I thought that you'd appreciate it. A couple brief comments on personal selling. And typically this happens with products that are high value, custom made, technically complex, fewer customers. So if you have those kinds of product characteristics, personal selling is best. If you're looking at products that are of low complexity, not worth too much, where there's a lot of competition and there's plenty of customers, then advertising and sales promotion, sales promotion being couponing, incentivizing, rebates, other things to stimulate buying, are more appropriate. It turns out that actually selling, if you've ever done it, and one good example is if you've ever been worked in the restaurant business or working in retail, where you're doing retail sales, it's a tough business. You've got to try to generate some leads potentially. You've got to qualify them. It's very, very expensive to do. It's not easy to do at all because there's always complaints and issues and objections that go with it. A difficult process. This gives you the comparison of traditional selling and relationship selling. Relationship selling is where you're actually spending a lot of time qualifying the leads and getting the best candidates to increase the chances that you're going to be able to make a sale. So that's a very significant difference, as opposed to someone like, let's say, a car salesman that, hey, look, all they want to do is just turn things over, sell them, and move on. They're focused on sales orientation versus, if you will, a market orientation. So the way to look at selling and the process of it is, one is a traditional way to sort of look at things, and the other one is more of a unique thing that takes a lot of time and effort, a lot of care, feeding, and nurturing of your potential customers and clients, and a very different way to sell. If you look at this particular slide here, what I want to focus on is the types of leads that I would consider, at least in my experience, really the best kind of leads. And those come from referrals. They also come from looking at in networking. Those are really the two best that you get, because these are people that if you're looking at trying to establish some customers and get some business going, who do you ask, right? Like, a lot of times if you have, let's say if you're looking at a really good school, for instance, in your case, and maybe your parents were involved in the process, and you start thinking about, well, let's find out who may have gone to the school before that we know, to get some recommendations, pros and cons of how that all works. So you're looking at things like networking and referrals. Those are always the best ways to get, so almost, if you will, qualified leads, which would take you to more of a relationship sell versus traditional selling. So all of these can generate some really good leads for potential business. Those are the two best. Let's see. And let's see, we really won't talk about Ron Popeil here at the moment. So that's that. Let's take a look at, where are we here? Next category, which would be, bear with me for 1 second. Okay, here we are right there. I did not post the information for the Rosewood Hotel because I was waiting to get some submissions from all of you, and I just didn't want to wait any longer since we're only a couple of days away from our final class. So if you haven't submitted it, perhaps you can just kind of close your ears while you hear the rest of these. We go over these slides, and if not, then if you've submitted it, please sort of listen to an overview of this. So the case basically was comparing, looking at, do I go individual branding or corporate branding, and then using something like customer lifetime value calculation to help you determine which strategy, which method of branding and campaigning, if you will, would be best. There's a lot of hotels in the world. Just looking at a company like Marriott, for instance, they have a bunch of hotels in all these different categories. So you kind of go back. If I kind of rushed it a little bit here, if you go back and you look at, here's the Ritz-Carlton, if you will. That's their version. Then there's JW Marriott. Then there's these Renaissance hotels, there's Marriott's, there's Courtyards, Fairfield, Town Place, and all these different categories that because obviously a hotel room is a place to stay while you may not be home, but what that means to some people varies quite a bit from one consumer to another. The Ritz-Carlton being one of the main competitors for Rosewood. Rosewood's not a very well-known name, but they're actually very high-end hotels. Here's an example of just kind of looking at where some of them are located in some pretty interesting places. If you look in the U.S., New York, Dallas, St. Martin in California, Menlo Park. You look in the Caribbean, there's a number of them, Antigua, Bermuda. In Mexico, Middle East, so one thing that's, you sort of kind of look at a trend here is wherever there's money, that's kind of like where you see these hotels. There's, so you kind of look at the pros and cons of individual versus corporate branding, and this is the kind of analysis that you would typically see from a marketing person trying to determine which path might be best for others. So these are what I would argue are the qualitative elements, right? Where you're trying to look at things that aren't sort of hard and fast, like customer lifetime value data, but things that are sort of more interpretive and have to be factored into any decision. So those would be qualitative elements. And then here's the formula to calculate customer lifetime value, and here's sort of the assumptions that you're using, right? Total number of guests with and without are the same for corporate branding or just individual branding. What people spend on average, number of days, the money that they're making. So you use the case and the information in the case to go through and using the formulas that are given, right? This is so that particular formula you don't have to actually do it out by hand. You can just put the information in the Excel spreadsheet that was given to you, and you actually calculate the difference between your actual customer value with and without. And if you look here, you say, well, the average customer only stays or is only a customer for 1.2 years, which doesn't seem like a lot. But these customers spend a ton of money each time they stay, so it's a pretty significant number. And the difference between with and without branding is small. It's only 0.08 years, which you would say, well, geez, that's not worth anything, is it? But when you actually plug those numbers into the balance of the spreadsheet, which calculates the value, you can see that the difference between one without branding here, which is $378.70 versus $461.56 with branding, is $82.86 per customer. But if you multiply that times 150,000 customers, guess what? you get a ton of money, right? That is a very millions, you're talking $30 million in extra money that comes from that particular path forward. So very, very significant, interestingly enough. So we'll spend a minute or two kind of going over that in class. Last couple slides that I want to focus on in talking about global issues. There's really only one or two that kind of matter here. And you look at companies like Procter & Gamble, they've gone after China, one of the world's largest markets. And there, you have to look at adjusting price, the kinds of things that are in the product, the channels are different, and you look at what's happened, at least from us. You look at like call centers in India, which we've become very common users of, and other companies like Procter & Gamble and others have taken advantage of. So you've got to really look at everything that's kind of out there. The infrastructure that's here, delivery of road system or transportation system may or may not allow easy delivery of materials and packages, things you got to look at. You got to look at stability of governments. Is it communist? Is it a free society? What impact it may have? Just in the news today, you've seen all kinds of things with unrest in countries like Turkey, in the Middle East, other areas in the world where there's actions going on. You got to look at what's happening with the economy. Is unemployment the same here? Is it different in other countries? But if you look at population growth, tons of increases from less developed countries, not as much from companies. The traditional ones like the U.S. and traditional companies in Europe are the smaller portion of what population is out there. So you've got to look at also people's ability to actually buy. Do they have the money? Even if you have a product, could they purchase it? Good example here is looking at the difference between Coke and Pepsi, and they've been great examples of brands that have exploded and have grown globally. But here, you got to look at what's your best strategy. So if you're looking at just trying to tap into global markets, maybe you're just looking at exporting. That's really all that you're doing. When you do that, all you're doing is you're taking your product, making it domestically wherever you are, and then shipping it out. But when you do that, you actually are sharing some of your profits with others, or limiting that. But if you look at direct investment, which is at the top of this pyramid, maybe you build a plant, a whole manufacturing operation. You put sales and marketing people, and you build up. Then you have tremendous upside and potential for selling. Problem with doing that, unfortunately, is if things don't work out, you've got a lot of money in it. So if you look at your ability to control what's happening here on the y-axis, much more significant as you go from exporting or franchising to alliances, joint venture where you share your profits with somebody, and then direct investment where you put all the money in. The risk gets higher too if things don't work out. So usually companies start out with an exporting position and strategy, and then over time, if it's warranted, move towards direct investment. And that's a very common practice that people use moving internationally. So you look at Walmart, for instance, largest retailer in the world. They've had some great success, reasonable success in Brazil and in China, but they've also failed miserably in some countries like Germany and others. So it's not a universal, always guaranteed one-size-fits-all, and they do really well. You have to develop it and adjust it accordingly based on competitors and consumer preferences. So that's a brief overview of the key elements from the last few sets of classes to look at. And let's see, I think, is there anything else I want to focus on? Oh, that'll be it. All right, so thanks.